Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. If you were to pull an art historian aside here in London and ask them to name 10 artists, 20 artists, even 50 artists from art history, the vast majority of them wouldn't name even one Black artist. In this episode, I had the joy of sitting down with Alayo Akinkugbe, the founder of an Instagram account that has been a game changer. Alayo founded a Black History of Art in 2020. And she did so with the aim of providing a more diversified overview of art history when she realized that she hadn't been taught about one Black artist throughout her whole first year studying history of art at Cambridge. The account has now amassed over 55,000 followers, highlighting the overlooked Black artists, sitters, curators, and thinkers from art history to present day. Within this episode, Alayo and I spoke about her education at Cambridge and the Courtauld in London, but we also dug deep into how she feels that the account has affected her career. We also talked about her professional trajectory and how what she has learned through her education in art history and curating, as well as her work within decolonizing the sector, has impacted the type of work she wants to do later on. Stay tuned to listen to Alayo and I get up close and personal with some deep-rooted issues in art and society. But also tune in to hear us talk about the hope we have for the sector and how fun working in the sector can be. Before I dive in, I wanted to let you lovely listeners know that All About Art is on Patreon. So if you want some behind-the-scenes content, maybe a bit of merch, the chance to get one-on-ones with me and my guests, or you're simply wanting to support this project, I would be absolutely thrilled if you decided to sign up. You can do so through the link in the show notes. I also wanted to say thank you to those who have already signed up. Your support means the world, and it makes the further production, improvement, and growth of the podcast possible. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful. And now, on to the interview. Alayo, thank you so much for being here with me today. Jumping right in, I first want to ask about your education. You studied at quite prestigious schools, completing your BA at Cambridge and now your MA at the Courtauld in London. Can you tell me a little bit about your studies and how your experience was at those universities?
Thank you very much for having me, Alexandra. That's a really good question to start with. I think to preface, I was very lucky to study art history at school as an A-level, which isn't something that many people could do because it's not offered at most schools in the UK. And so I think had I not studied it, I probably wouldn't have ended up picking art history at university. So I think that was a really, really important foundation. And then Cambridge, it was like my dream before I went there. Then when I got there, it kind of, I wouldn't say it turned into a nightmare, but it was maybe didn't live up to these really, really high expectations I had of it.
Of course.
But I would say that on the educational side, I really, really, I enjoyed my degree. Even though the reason that I started a Black History of Art was kind of not to, I wouldn't say to oppose my degree, but to kind of further my knowledge of Black artists because we weren't studying any Black artists. We didn't study any Black artists in first year.
Yeah.
I think education-wise, the degree was amazing. We had incredible teachers. I do think there were changes that could be made, and I think that they did start to make changes while I was there. Like, they began to diversify the curriculum. They introduced new papers, like a paper on Latin American art and a survey course on Chinese art. And obviously there are many issues with survey courses, but I think they were definitely taking steps in the right direction. And because I love art history anyway, and the art history I was learning before I was at Cambridge was obviously very canonical, European and white. I think the degree was the best part of Cambridge for me, basically.
Yeah. Can you, just for our listeners, when were you at Cambridge?
So I was at Cambridge from 2018 to 2021.
Got it.
So half of my degree was eaten up by the pandemic.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm saying it's so good that I enjoyed the degree, because that was all that was left of Cambridge, like during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Years. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then in September 2021, I started my MA at Courtauld in curating, and that's also been incredible. It is very different to Cambridge in that this specific course is very different to the Cambridge History of Art course because it's focused on curating. It feels a bit more applied than just art history.
Yeah.
It's kind of insane that as you get older, it sort of becomes nicher and nicher. Like, I still love the broad history of art and everything, but I've come to realize that what I really want to do is curate, and I want to curate contemporary art. So this course has been great. We've met so many curators and artists, and we all do a work placement, which is one of my favorite parts of it. I've been working at the Hayward Gallery. So yeah, it's just been like the perfect transition from Cambridge art history, pandemic years, starting a Black History of Art in the pandemic, to moving to London, still getting to be a student, yet also being able to work and do a Black History of Art things. I can't really fault, I mean, in my experience of studying at these two institutions has actually been great. I thought Cambridge was very responsive to change. The Cambridge Art History department were responsive to change, and at the Courtauld I've just had a great time. So yeah.
Yeah, I think what you said a bit earlier when you were speaking about how you didn't want to just continue with straight art history, it was really interesting for you to be able to do something that was more applied and more practical. And I think that that's some kind of misconception often when we talk about a career in the arts, is that people study art history and a lot of people outside of the sector don't realize how useful it is to then be able to apply it. Like, that base is so valuable, and it's so wonderful that you got such a wonderful education. So while studying, you mentioned earlier that at Cambridge you saw a big lack of representation for Black people within the history of art, which inspired that next step that you took when the pandemic hit, because you then started your Instagram page, A Black History of Art. Can you share further details with me on what motivated you to start it and kind of how you got into actually starting it?
In my first year, I kind of had this idea of what would a Black history of art look like. You couldn't have Black art history or just Black history of art. There isn't a Black version of art history, and it shouldn't be separate. So I thought if there was something that was a Black history of art, so a perspective on what Blackness in art history is, or something that kind of represents and shows all the Black aspects of art history as it exists, then that would be a really cool resource. And in my head, I was like, one day I would love to work on writing a book like that. I should say that what triggered that was I was writing for my first year dissertation about this pre-Raphaelite model, Fanny Eaton, who I feel has got quite a lot of attention since then. Like, I've seen a lot of things about her, and there was like a Google doodle about her. But every single time, even though I was studying and enjoying this very white art history, every time it came to me doing my own research, I would always lean into something that was Black. So I chose to write about this pre-Raphaelite sitter. And so I think that's what kind of triggered the thoughts in my head. I didn't realize until after I started a Black History of Art that we didn't study any Black artists in my first year of Cambridge. But the real crux of it was at the beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic, when I was studying an incredible contemporary art course that focused on the US and the UK from I think around the 80s onwards. It was the only contemporary art paper at Cambridge taught by Amy Tobin. It was the first time in my education that I had been introduced to artists whose work really, really resonated with me personally. We came across Faith Ringgold, Lorna Simpson, all these kind of great names from like the 80s onwards.
Yeah.
And I kind of fell deeper in love with art history. So as I said, I loved all of it, even the canonical stuff like Dutch, still lives, everything. But like this really, I was like, this is incredible. Like this is amazing, and it's incredible to be able to write about it. And it was also the first time I was writing about more contemporary art. And so when that paper ended, I was like, that was so incredible. Like, I'm not going to get another chance to study Black artists at Cambridge. It's very unlikely that I will. And I was completely right. I didn't then, after that point, get another opportunity. And so I was like, I'll start this page as a means to self-educate. And then it did start as that. But then I noticed, like, very, very early on, I would follow people who I admired in the art world. And so I followed, like, one of my favorite curators, and they followed back immediately, and I was like, oh my God. And I was like, maybe this is actually a good concept. Like, I haven't posted anything, and this person who I really admire has just followed me back. This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So then I started posting things, and this kind of thing happened a lot. So like so in the pandemic, I remember following the great woman artist Katie Hessel, and she followed back. This was when I had like 300 followers. And so that kind of thing kept happening. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, why are all these people who I really admire like following my little page? I was like, it must be a good idea. Then it got to the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. And that's when all the followers started coming in, because suddenly everyone was interested in educating themselves on all things that were Black. And it was topical, it was trendy, it was current. And I've said this before on Instagram, it makes me feel a bit sad that that was the ultimate trigger of the success of the page. I know it's not quite as direct as that, but it comes back to something very dark and sinister. So in short, it was me doing the course, Amy Tobin's paper on contemporary art, learning about Black artists, wanting more, starting the page to self-educate, then being encouraged further by all these people I admire following me back when it was very, very tiny.
Yeah.
And then everything else just followed after that.
Yeah. I mean, you and I spoke about this very briefly, and I mentioned that I saw your page back when it had 200, 300, 400 followers, and I followed you. And it was such a joy to see that. And that was just in the beginning, kind of when you didn't have a huge following, when you didn't have a lot of posts. But it was really interesting because I had also, when I went to UCL, I had a course, and it was called The Body and Politics of Color. And it was looking at, it was, honestly, I can't really say what it was looking at, because it didn't really go into anything that I think was critical enough to look at what the problems are within what we study and how we look at it from a very colonial point of view. And so I was kind of disappointed in that course, but to be honest, I also recognize that that course was hit by the pandemic and by strikes, so I didn't get the full education of that either. But you mentioned earlier that you started the account in 2020, in February, before everything shut down, and you've grown exponentially since then, because now you have amassed over 50,000 followers. How do you feel like that following and that reach has impacted your career? Do you feel like it's opened some doors for you?
Massively, like completely, 100%. My career would not exist without that reach. That reach is the thing that has basically changed everything. Yeah, I think every single door that's been opened to me is because of a Black history of art. Having any kind of insight into the art world, going to events, writing articles, everything, all of that is because of a Black history of art. I mean, I started it kind of at an inconvenient time for me personally, because I was about to go into third year of Cambridge and everything was intense. And then even whilst doing this master's, although it's been a bit less intense than Cambridge, it's still been kind of like stressful being a full-time student and also having all these other things going on. Everything that I've done pretty much has been, I don't want to say given to me, but offered to me, which is to me mind-blowing. Like, I haven't actually actively gone out searching for specific opportunities. They've all come to me because of the page, because I've had all this uni work going on. There's no time to pitch an article. There's no time to look for jobs to apply to. And yeah, so the page, and of course the reach of the page, has formed the foundation for my career moving forward, which I'm so, so grateful for. And this is absolutely not where I expected to be at this age.
Just for people listening, how old are you?
I'm 21.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just finishing your master's.
Yeah.
I mean, it's phenomenal. And I was reading in an interview that you did with the Tab, and you identified a few things that were important to you, such as not relating everything to an artist's race, and that we should be moving beyond that. Mm-hmm. Another thing was relating to the curriculum, which is something that you touched on earlier. What is it, in your opinion, that we as creative practitioners can be doing to make sure that we are contributing to that positive change?
I think that in the past 2 years, so since the death of George Floyd, and I keep saying the death, since the murder of George Floyd, there have been a lot of positive changes. I think that galleries have been keen to diversify their roster of artists. I think that institutions are putting on shows that are trying to be more inclusive of Black narratives and Black stories. So I think there is change being made. How can it be improved? I think access is still the biggest issue with the art world. Basically, studying art history at Cambridge, I was the only Black person in my year. The year below me, I think there were no Black people. And then in the year below that, I think there was one. So I think access is a huge issue. It comes all the way back down to, in my opinion, to education. People don't have access to art and to the art world. I think creating opportunities, creating access is one of the most important things. I don't think there is one specific thing that can be done. I feel like it's a process. It's very easy to get caught up in this little art world bubble and be totally unaware of all the people who are on the outside and can't get in. And that's why I keep saying access. And how do you create access? It's by putting on shows that resonate with people who aren't just you. It's by outreach and like creating job opportunities. Like there's so much. It's like this huge, massive, it almost seems like an insurmountable thing. I think it's kind of like a process of constantly making sure that doors are being opened to people who wouldn't in the past or haven't ordinarily had doors open to them. That is such a difficult thing.
What you were saying earlier about thinking about putting on shows that resonate with people, it also means being aware of the texts that you're writing and making it not in a language that requires a PhD in order to understand. Because
so not
it's like,
jargon-filled stuff. It's like make it readable for someone who doesn't have a PhD in art history or hasn't even studied art history, or maybe isn't even like a museum goer. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like the main thing for me, at least with the page and what I would want to do with exhibitions, is to communicate something that maybe is complicated, but to communicate it in a way that is easily understandable, because why would you want to exclude?
Absolutely. And that also makes it more accessible, not only because of the language that you're using, but also the medium in which you do it, because you're doing it on an everyday platform that people go on and look at. You're doing it in very, oh God, I don't want to use this term because this is what someone said, very snackable. And I hate that.
But it's kind of true.
But it's
just like...
And you should be, this is a theory that Maureen Tanguy, who I've also had on the podcast in the past, she has this initiative called the Visual Diet. And she says you should be feeding yourself visually with things that matter and not things like, for example, Kim Kardashian or something like that. And so when we're using that metaphor, also this snackable content that's also incredibly healthy for your brain, for your empathy, for how you understand other people's perspectives.
Really interesting.
And so I do think that you make a really good point in that it seems like an insurmountable amount of things that we need to be working on. Yeah. But if we do little things, quote unquote, but often,
yes, exactly,
then these things will come together and a system will start to morph and change.
And I sort of feel like that's what's been happening over the past 2 years.
And so shifting from that into education again, because this is something that we're talking about that's incredibly important, not just higher education, but also, you know, from a younger age. The fact that funding has been cut, for example, in the UK in arts and culture for higher education is detrimental. But you've really enjoyed your course at the Courtauld. So can you tell me more about your master's course? Because you are being taught by some amazing professionals in the arts. And how do you think that their teaching, their advice, and or mentorship will have an effect on what type of career you decide to pursue in the future?
Really, really interesting. Because I actually think that this year has been pivotal, and the people that I've met, that the conversations we've had with them are actually going to have a huge impact on my career. Because I think had I not had the chance to think about what kind of curator do I want to be? Do I want to work in an institution? Is it possible for me to be an independent curator? None of these ideas were in my head in my third year at Cambridge. I was just like, I want to curate. I had no idea how or what. Every time we would meet a curator, it would start with a conversation about their career, which I think is fantastic. I think that was really useful, at least for me on this course. I found that to be one of the best things, was that they would always give us a personal insight and they would talk about the steps that they took to get where they were. Multitude of paths that you can take as a curator or just in the arts. There's so many different ways of going about it. And I think I do want to be an independent curator. Okay. I think that a Black history of art has... I mean, if I had all the time in the world and hadn't been studying full-time for the whole time that I've been doing a Black history of art, I feel like there's a lot more that I can put into it, not just the page, but all the adjacent things like writing articles and everything. I hate that I keep having to say no to opportunities because I'm doing a degree.
Absolutely.
And it feels like it's setting me back in a way. So I can't wait to be out there and able to do the things that I would have liked to have been doing the past 2 years. So I think that if I was able to somehow make a career as an independent curator work, and then also be able to do all my Black History of Art things, that would be the dream. That's basically what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's why I wouldn't, at least at this point in time, maybe later on, that's why I wouldn't want to work in an institution immediately, because then that would be a full-time job working for somebody else doing what they want me to do. And then again, I would be back in this position that I've been in for the past 2 years of having to do this other thing all the time, but also trying to run
something that you're really passionate about.
Something that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what I was going to say is why it's important that we met these people, all of these curators, is that they have opened my mind to the possibility of being an independent curator, making it work, being able to travel, curating exhibitions in different places, perhaps being recruited by an institution as an external curator, that kind of thing. And I wouldn't have known about all those possibilities if not for all these people.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's also what I'm trying to do a little bit with the podcast. And so that makes me so happy to hear, because having these conversations does make a difference. Seeing how people do things or listening to it and finding out how they took these steps, I think that it's really helpful because it does open your mind a little bit to what's possible. You don't have to study art history for a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD and specialize in, I don't know, 16th century
And I really
painting.
did, genuinely, probably if you asked me this a year and a half ago, I would have said, well, I'll have to do a PhD because apparently that's what you need to be a curator.
Yeah.
Whereas now I know that that's just not true.
Yeah. What do you think about the importance of networking in a professional context? So going from social media, social networks to actually networking both on and offline.
So networking to me is a bit of a strange one because I feel like I entered into I'll call it the art landscape because I just don't want to say I entered into the art world completely like on social media. So I never really had the thing of like going to events until like October 2021 when it was Freeze Week. But I wasn't consciously thinking about it then. It was just like a couple of weeks later when I was like, what just happened? I had met so many people so quickly. People I'd admired, people who I had only met online. I literally think that Freeze Week in October 2021, it was like, it laid the foundation of any kind of network that I have now.
Yeah.
Because even though I had met people online, so to speak, I didn't feel like I had some kind of network until I had finally met all these people.
Absolutely.
In reality.
Yeah.
And also networking, I find very hard just in general, like as a thing. I think it's really important to have a network. And I've noticed, like, I remember being at uni and, like, this kind of stuff wouldn't really apply to art history students, but it'd be, like, for lawyers, how to network, like an event on how to network, on networking, or, like, networking brunch and, like, all of this kind of thing. And so I always thought of it as really, like, this strange skill, but actually it's very important to have a network. And it almost feels like, in some ways it feels like making friends. I guess with some people it feels like more of a professional relationship than a friendly relationship. But it's important to have a network, I think, because it's really nice to feel like you have some kind of community or your people or the people that you can trust, the people who you know when you go to some kind of event are going to be there and you won't feel out of place or uncomfortable.
Yeah, and you can bounce ideas off of them if you're stuck with something.
Exactly.
And it's so important.
It's strange. I mean, I finally feel like I've built some important relationships and friendships in the art world, which is not something I knew was coming when I left Cambridge in June. Yeah. And I'm so glad that it's happened. And being in London has obviously also facilitated that.
Yes, of course. Anyone who's listening, stay tuned because that is something that is on the All About Art roster for the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, because I am very passionate about networking, but I also think that authentic networking and finding people you can trust and rely on is incredibly important because it's these authentic connections that help you grow as a professional. Yeah. No one ever does it alone. Yeah. I've had massive help from people. I have had massive encouragement from people, advice. I mean, I would not have started this podcast if I wouldn't have sat down with my friend and said, I think I'm going to help this small gallery start a podcast. And she said, Alex, do it on your own. Yeah. You have a voice, do it on your own. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, but like, what if no one likes it? Or like, I don't know how to edit. I don't know how to do all this. And she was like, you can learn. And she said that to me. And that was, so shout out Betty if you're listening to this, but that was literally what kind of pushed me into that direction. So I'm really passionate about that. And so I'm glad that you also have underlined that. And I hope to be able to create something for people in arts and culture where they feel not like everyone's just thrown into a room and you have to network either, though, where it's a specific focus on art and culture, where, I mean, what do you even say when you go to one of these events? Like, and so I want to encourage people to be able to develop something like that and make something specific to people in the arts.
Yes,
so,
exactly. And I think
stay tuned.
It's really, that is really important. And it's not something you learn, obviously, at university. And it's not something...
Not at all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was going to say that it's normally the only time that I would properly explain my page is if someone already kind of had an idea about it, or if someone was really, really curious about me and actually interested in what I had to say, then I might start talking about the page a lot. Or if I had a friend there who was going to hype me up, because I'm just like, I'm a student with an Instagram.
being humble is also important. That's wonderful. But
you have to sell yourself.
But you have to acknowledge your accomplishments and what you've worked for and what you've built. And so I'm going to cut this in the podcast and send that little snippet to you every time you're about to go to an event, and be encouraged to talk about your successes, because they're there for a reason. This was your idea, your execution, your passion.
Yeah.
You did this. And that's amazing. And now you're getting all sheepish.
This is why networking is a skill.
But I had to work on that too, because I remember, and again, I'm gonna mention Maureen, because I was at an event and Maureen was introducing me to people, and she was like, "This is Alexandra. She has an amazing podcast." But I would never say I have a podcast in the first, I think, 9 months of having this podcast. And now I say, oh, I work in the arts and I have an arts podcast. And that's my introduction, because this is one of my big passions, is to do this. Yeah. I'm going to veer into my penultimate question, because I think that this is a good time. What is a piece of advice that you would give someone starting out in the arts and wanting to pursue a career in the sector? Because
you're saying the arts, I would say, if you don't know exactly what you want to do, then try out as many things as possible. Yeah. Because I think, based on my experience, I thought, no, I would not want to write articles. I'm not a journalist. This doesn't make any sense for me. But I've really enjoyed writing articles, because I just kind of threw myself into it. I've really enjoyed it and rediscovered a love for that kind of writing. I'm just saying that based on my experience doing a range of things, like giving talks or writing an article or curating or giving a tour, all of these kinds of things I think would have intimidated me before, because I didn't necessarily think that I could do them. So I think if someone is wanting a career in the arts and doesn't know what they want to do, then try out as many things as possible. And I feel like generally, if you're interested in the arts, there are many things that you would enjoy. So try out different things. Seek out internships or volunteering. Try your hand at curating if you can. Yeah. Try and work in a commercial gallery and in an institution. Try and you've done every single little sector within the art world. You've done. Yeah. And I think that that's really important, because then you build a network across all of these mini sectors within the art world. Yeah. And then you also can find out what it is that you really, really like and what you really, really want to do. Absolutely. You gain a really broad overview. And again, I can only completely support what you're saying. And because that's exactly the path that I followed. I started university, and every summer I did 1 to 2 internships I've done in galleries. I worked in a museum. I worked for 4 years in an auction house. I have now had a little stint in an artist studio. I've curated independently. Yeah. I've written articles. I'm a podcaster. And now I'm working in sales in a gallery. And it's all these different corners that I've touched to try and think, well, what do I want to do? What does the art world look like? Because I didn't grow up in a family that was, in the arts. I didn't grow up with a lot of exposure to it. I just grew up with my dad drawing comics, which is great because that creativity was flowing from a young age. Yeah. But I didn't know anything about museums. For anyone listening who is thinking about going into the arts, who is studying something like in arts and humanities, or who is already in the arts, I think just gaining as much experience as you can at a young age, or
in the beginning of your career, young or not, I think that it's really important to just dip your toe in different things. But I'm going to ask you my final question and we can wrap up this episode. And this is a bit of a fun one because I always love to ask my guests this at the end. If you would pick one artist from art history to have dinner with, who would it be and why?
This is probably the first Black artist I came across naturally when I was like 16 at school and doing art GCSE and thinking, who do I want to be inspired by? This is so bait, but I would pick Jean-Michel Basquiat. I've watched interviews and everything, but I feel like he would be really, really interesting to have dinner with. He's literally the most predictable person, but yeah.
Not at all. I wasn't expecting
Really?
Basquiat.
Yeah. Well, there we
wasn't.
go. Yeah, I would pick Basquiat for sure.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Alayo, thank you so much for sitting down with me and telling me about your education, your career, your goals, and a Black history of art.
Thank you very much for having me on the podcast, Alexandra. This has been weirdly therapeutic, reflective, and I don't know, amazing. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.